Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats as the real debate is about to begin.
Hello and welcome to Cinema Craptaculus presents The Real Debate, where we debate the good and bad of some of your favorite or perhaps least favorite movies of all time. My name is JDH, and as your moderator, my goal is to conduct a spirited debate which may inspire you to reconsider your opinion of today's topic. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and rate us wherever you listen to podcasts. Not only does it feed our egos, but it also helps get the Craptaculus word out there. Today, we are lucky to have Cinema Craptaculus's very own Dave Humphreys to serve as our official judge for our debate. Welcome, Dave. Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much. You know, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I love being the judge because all I have to do is sit here and listen.
I love it. At the end of the show, you, sir, will give us all of your opinions about the debate and cast the final vote.
All of a sudden, this is starting to sound a little bit like work. Maybe I was wrong?
Yes, you have a lot to do. Not only do you have to pay attention, you're going to need to take a lot of notes because we have a lot of movies to talk about today. Because today's topic is Bond versus Bond. Never Say Never Again versus every other James Bond movie. We have a debater today that has declared Never Say Never Again as the best James Bond movie of all time. And before we get started, before I introduce our debaters, Dave, do you have any thoughts on the Bond franchise coming into this? Is your opinion swayed in either direction?
Look, here's the thing. I don't know Bond that well. I've seen all the movies, but I can never remember the movies. And I have my favorites, which I would not say are the best Bond films. They're just my personal favorite Bond films.
Okay.
Never Say Never just happens to be the first Bond movie I ever saw.
Really? Okay.
And that may have been the last time I saw that movie back in 1983. So,
all right. So you haven't seen it before the debate today. You're not...
Correct. I haven't seen it in...
Excellent. So this debate is fully open to either participant, and let's see who can sway the judge here. So today we are bringing back a real debate winner, Mr. Matthew Godecker, who has claimed Never Say Never Again is the best James Bond movie of all time. Welcome back to the show, Matthew Godecker.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And you know what, Dave? I think it might have been the first Bond movie I saw, too. I was 11 years old when it came out, and that might have been the very first one, because before that, my dad wouldn't let me see something like that.
Probably.
Even now, he won't let you see something like that.
No. And
you still haven't seen Dr. No, Goldfinger.
My God. I got George Lazenby and Never Say Never. That's all I need.
That's all you've got. Well, what did you do to prepare for the debate today, Matt? Did you rewatch the film? Are you just so familiar with it, you just dive in, you're ready to go?
No, I did rewatch it, and I also had not seen the latest Bond, so I had to watch that, the newest, the Daniel Craig. So now I have seen every Bond movie and literally just watched Never Say Never. So
you are ready now to take on the person who is opposing the opinion of Never Say Never Again as the best in the franchise. So Cinema Craptaculus had to bring in our very own master of all things James Bond into the debate arena to help crown a Bond winner. And that person, of course, is Mr. John Ford. Welcome to the debate.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
So happy to have you. We've wanted you on The Real Debate for a long time. And so obviously when this topic came up, we had to come to you. I'm so glad that you were able to make time for it today. What have you done to prepare for the debate today?
Just be John.
I've lived every decade of my life, which pretty much includes the Bond movies. And, you were talking about the first Bond movie we saw. I don't know if it was the first film I saw, but the first exposure I had to Bond when I was a child. And Dave's heard me do this voice, but, the ABC Sunday night movie, Sean Connery stars.
Yes.
James Bond in Goldfinger. Anyway, so it was Goldfinger. My parents had it on, and I wandered downstairs, and I happened to just peek around the corner. I was supposed to be in bed, and it was when the girl is laid out on the bed in gold, dead.
Oh, okay.
Scared me to death.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
That was my first exposure. But yes, I've in preparation for this actual debate, I know that film really well, and I know all the other films really well. So I think I'm just going to rely on my hopefully uncanny knowledge. But
wow.
I may get tripped up.
Wow.
Very good. Well, but
I gotta say, first of all, I'm sorry, John. I think it's very impressive that Godecker has laid his claim on this title, Never Say Never Again, which is probably not the most well-known James Bond film.
It's a gutsy move, Dave. It's a gutsy move.
It's an extremely gutsy move. I mean, I rewatched it, and there's a lot about it that, having watched it, I'm like, can't believe that that's the one that you picked. And now I'm actually curious because it feels like this is either going to be an easy challenge for you because you're really defending the one movie versus having to try to defend the arsenal of movies, or is it the other way around? Does John actually have the advantage because he's got so many other movies?
I don't know, because he's got
to compete against the one.
If he's going to pick Goldfinger, for example, to just defend, it's hard. I mean, it's hard not to love that movie.
Well, and this is what I want to do. Before we jump into the debate, I want to kind of get a little context on both of your experiences with James Bond. So first, who is your favorite actor to portray James Bond? And Matt, I'll start with you.
Connery is the best Bond, in my opinion. I don't think there's much debate about that.
What would your second be? For is there a close second?
No, there's not a close second.
No, it's not even close. John, how about you?
You know, I'm a Connery guy, and part of this because the guy that just created the role and created it against odds that were stacked against him in the casting, like many of the characters. I think the only people that really kind of had an easy go of casting were Brosnan. Well, not Brosnan, but in terms of being accepted right away, Brosnan and Moore were the ones that kind of the public was fine. There wasn't an outcry, but Connery is my favorite. If I had to pick a second, it's hard because each one represents the era they're in. So it's kind of like I can't really compare Daniel Craig to George Lazenby because Daniel Craig was a trained actor given these really good scripts and expected to deliver 21st century emotion and sensibility. George Lazenby wasn't asked to do that. So, but if I had to pick a second, I think the best actor in the role other than Connery would be Craig, but my favorite would probably Roger Moore because he's of my era.
Oh wow,
yeah,
very interesting.
I can see that as well, and I think it would have been a very different Bond had Pierce Brosnan gotten the role when he should have in the '80s, but he got screwed out of it. So it might have been a whole
later
different,
in life.
Yeah, might have been a whole different Bond in the '80s with him.
All right, well let me ask this then. Give me your top 5 favorite James Bond movies of all time. We know Never Say Never is at the top of your list, Matt, but give me like 4 or 5 others that jump out.
Well, Goldfinger and Dr. No, I think they have to be near the top of the list because they're the original. Every Bond movie that came after those is kind of just copied in a lot of ways. But I love the 70s stuff with Roger Moore, so I love The Man with the Golden Gun.
Okay.
Moonraker is awesome. View to a Kill, even though Roger Moore at that point is pretty darn old.
But you can't beat Duran Duran and Grace.
You can't. Christopher Walken. Yeah, I mean, you can't beat that movie. And also, I also put on the list To Live and Let Die, or Live and Let Die.
All right, John, what do you think about that list, and what would your own be?
I was just thinking of a movie, To Live and Let Die in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna handicap myself here and just say, relax. I'm not going to use A View to a Kill to go head to head with.
Hey man, what's wrong with View to a Kill, man?
I will say that my list, I cannot pick a favorite because when I watch each one, I find the things that I like about them, and they're so different. If they all came out within 10 years of each other, it'd be easier to do, kind of like Harry Potter movies. But with Bond, it's 6 decades. So, but if I had to put a list together, it'll look a little different than my esteemed opponent here. But at the top, I have Goldfinger. And then actually at number 2, I actually have Skyfall.
I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask you about
I have
Skyfall.
Casino Royale at 3, and then Spy Who Loved Me at 4, and then if I had to do a number 5, it would be GoldenEye.
Wow, okay.
And 2 of those are entry-level debut films for the actor, which would be GoldenEye and Casino Royale, both incidentally directed by the same director, Martin Campbell. I think if I could squeeze in like an extra in between, I'd probably have For Your Eyes Only on there, probably have Thunderball. I have a soft spot for You Only Live Twice, even The Living Daylights.
So your top 5 is all the James Bond.
Yeah, is now 15.
Well, John, they're squeezed in. They're like top. They're like 3.5 would be, Octopussy.
What I love about the actual top 5, let's just stick with those top 5, is that you have picked films that have a range in terms of the casting. I mean, you've got Daniel Craig, Roger Moore, Pierce Brosnan, and Connery in the top 5. Where would Never Say Never Again fall on your list? And let's go with the 26 James Bond movies,
Wait,
forgetting
are we
the
debating
original
already?
Casino. We're not debating. I'm curious where on the, like, does Never Say Never even land anywhere in the top 10 out of the 26, or is it so far down the list for you? I'm curious, like, does it have any respect?
Not gonna crack the top 10.
Not gonna even crack. Okay. Good to know. Good to know.
Understandable.
Well, with that, what's that?
Hey, everybody has their taste. I mean, personally, I wouldn't have put Skyfall on any list, but that's
Excellent. Well, let's get into that then with the debate. Let's jump right in. We will have 3 rounds along with closing statements. In the first 3 rounds, I'll ask a question. Each viewpoint will have a set time to answer, after which there will be an open discussion period. Keep in mind, you will be judged by Dave on your ability to stay within the guidelines of each question and articulate your case. So let's see if one of you will change your opinion here on the real debate. Let's grab our coin.
And now it's time for the coin flip.
And John, you are a first timer here, so I'm going to let you call it in the air, heads or tails.
Tails.
Tails. And it's heads.
Wow.
Mr. Godecker, would you like to go first, or would you like to give it over to John?
I'm going to go first.
You're going to go first. Here is the first question. Bond films are known for opening with great action sequences that set the tone and launch 007 on his adventure. Speaking specifically to the opening of Bond films, how does the opening of Never Say Never Again compare to the other films, and how does this support your case for or against Never Say Never Again? You have a minute and a half.
Excellent question. So the opening of Never Say Never, just to refresh anybody, is he's trying to break into looks like a drug lord's house or something. He's there to rescue a woman who's been kidnapped. So he goes through the compound, he beats everybody up, and then he gets to the woman who's tied up in the bed, and she stabs him in the gut. Whoops, surprise. Turns out the whole opening was a training exercise, which I think actually sets up the whole tone of this particular Bond, because this Bond is a different Bond. It's made by a different company. It's made with a different attitude. So the fact that the whole opening essentially is fake really just, I think, sets the tone for the whole movie, because not only does it set up, he's old now. Although, ironically, Roger Moore in real life is 3 years older than Sean Connery. And so it sets up for the tone of the whole movie that this is going to be a little different. Even the opening credit, they don't do the usual, gun with the thing for the opening song. It just kind of fades away into the story. In fact, there's really no opening song. And I think that's important, because you're watching something different. Somebody else has the reins of a movie franchise.
Excellent. And with that is time. John, we'll turn it over to you.
Well, I don't want to reiterate the description of the last one, because I'm having to use all the other ones as benchmarks, which is a little unfair. The training exercise, I will say, is novel, but it was done in From Russia with Love, where Bond is stalking someone or being stalked, and then he gets killed by Red Grant, played by Robert Shaw, and then he turns out that it was just a Russian stooge training exercise. They take the mask off and they kill their guys. So we'd kind of seen that before, and I think it was flipped a bit. But I think the opening of Never Say Never Again was hamstrung by the fact that they could not use the Monty Norman, John Barry music, and I think that immediately is going to set the audience for a bit of a letdown, because you just want to hear that music. And maybe going in, you're going to know you're not going to hear it, but without that opening, you don't need the gun barrel, but you definitely need the music. And we're talking about there's no song. I think you mean like no music in the very beginning, because there was a credit song later, which is played throughout. Now that's different, because we're hearing the music over the scene, whereas in the other franchise, they have the opening pre-credits, then the song. I did not like Lanny Hall's song, and it was actually another one sung by Phyllis Hyman, Never Say Never Again, and because she was not the girlfriend of the composer, it was not used. And so, and if you've heard it, they recently released it. It's actually a very good song. It's too bad. I like Connery in it, but I think that when you compare some of the other films with the stunt work and the scenery and planes, I think this one is interesting, as he said, but I don't think it's as exciting. It's pretty much him just going through a jungle into a house and then getting stabbed in the arm.
Well, with that, let's jump into the open debate portion of this, Matt. So why don't you go ahead and chime in here?
Well, again, I think you're not wrong, sir, but I do think that because you don't have the normal stuff, that sets it apart, and I think that makes it unique. I disagree. I like the song. I actually like the song. And maybe it's partly because I saw this when I was 11, and this was probably the most adult thing I'd seen. But it brings back, it evokes a memory in me.
Any thoughts, John?
I agree. And I think, one of the things it does well is that it actually keeps the protagonist secret. And Connery's actually revealed later on into it, which I actually think is kind of novel. We've seen it in other films where they're introducing a character like Lazenby on Her Majesty's Secret Service. But this one, it's a little wink-wink because we know we're seeing Connery, waiting for it. I think one of the things that I always like is when there's a bit of interaction with characters. And I think in, for instance, The World Is Not Enough, Brosnan's talking to the people he's going to kill beforehand. This one, it's just, Connery's on a training exercise, so he's not going to converse. And I think that can work, but I think it worked better in The Living Daylights when in another training exercise, Timothy Dalton is introduced. He doesn't talk, but I think that one just had more exciting stunts. And it was only like a few years after Never Say Never. I think perhaps maybe they were saving their budget in the film for later sequences, and so they just didn't want to spend that lavishly on the opening, and I appreciate that. But I think
you said something very important, I think, about a wink. James Bond always has kind of a wink and a nod to the character, and that's why I do like the opening scene a lot, because once he gets stabbed, he almost looks into camera and goes, oh, Jesus. So I kind of like that it sets right off with the usual tone of wink, wink, I'm James Bond, which is got to be in every movie.
I'll just add that in that era, we should both acknowledge that it was a real wink-week period. I mean, Roger Moore's Octopussy the same year had a lot of Tarzan yells and telling big tigers to sit. And so that whole era was kind of couched in, like, we're not taking any of this too seriously. So I think in that respect, I think Connery's film actually kind of fits into the world that Roger Moore was already occupying. So the films actually kind of don't butt heads as much as people think.
Yeah.
With that, we're going to move on to question number 2. John, you will go first. A hero is only as good as the villain. 007 has faced many villains and their henchmen throughout the franchise. Discuss the Bond villains and how they support your side of the debate, for or against Never Say Never Again.
I think we're dealing again with my previous statement of just eras. And I think in the 80s, I don't think villains in the 80s were particularly that strong. I think we had strong actors doing it. And in that window, we had Christopher Walken, we had Louis Jourdan, and in this case, Klaus Maria Brandauer, who was doing the role of Largo that another actor, Adolfo Cecili, or whatever his name is, did in the original Thunderball, which this is based on. I think, first of all, again, I'm just going to say that since this film is a remake, you're seeing the same villain again, portrayed differently. I think Klaus Maria Brandauer is a very good actor. I think he's believable in the part, which is important. I don't think he's particularly memorable to a lot of people. I mean, and part of that is they don't give him the accoutrements of a mouse suit and a cat or a scar. Maybe that's a little refreshing. They didn't do that a lot in the 80s. That was more of the 60s and later. I like Klaus Maria Brandauer, but when you stack him up against Goldfinger, the man with the golden gun, Scaramanga, Telly Savalas' Blofeld, or even Charles Gray Blofeld. You stack him up against Sean Bean, who was an equal former friend. You stack him up against Silva in Skyfall, or I'm just naming off a few. Hugo Drax with his crazy. He's a believable guy, but he seems like just sort of an average rich dude with a plot. I don't think he makes a memorable Bond villain. I like him in the role. I think he's appealing. He's got a lot of charisma, but as a Bond villain, I don't think he really stands out.
Okay, and that's time. Matt, we're going to jump over to you. Villains.
I think you underestimate Mr. Brandauer, and I also think you've forgotten that Max von Sydow is sort of the second bad guy in the movie, and just to see Max von Sydow do anything is awesome. I think Klaus Maria Brandauer does a great job. He does a great job of being threatening without really being violent or killing anybody necessarily. His subtle sort of weird European accent and vague threats, I think, are scarier than a lot of the other Bond films. I mean, Goldfinger just comes out and says, "No, Mr. Bond, I want you to die." I mean, it's right in your face, which is quite enjoyable. But I think this is a little more subtle, and I think that he's a great actor in this movie. So I think you got to give him a break, man.
Okay, let's go into the open debate. Discuss the villains.
I mean, I'll defer to him because I think that was a great opening using Brandauer.
Yeah, Yeah, and I mean it's hard to say that Goldfinger or Dr. No aren't brilliant. I'm here to say that, but I think this guy has some subtlety to him that I don't think he even compares to any of the villains in the Craig movies at all.
I think, though, we're talking about a character versus a Bond villain, and I think there needs to be a delineation because some of these characters are drawn so broadly or so realistically, as in the case in maybe Craig and even Brandauer, that it's really hard to compare them. I mean, Goldfinger is a very colorful, over-the-top villain, and he's a stark contrast to the previous. But, and again, I'm not talking about henchmen. We can talk about that later. I'm just talking about the main villain. I think that Christopher Walken's Max Zorin, while not one of my favorite films, he is a very memorable Bond villain. And part of that it's just that it's Walken. So I think we need to sort of separate the Bond villain versus the Bond villain as a real character. So if we were to argue that Klaus-Maria Brandauer is a more charismatic, menacing villain in the piece, I'd say he succeeds. Absolutely, I totally agree. Especially in his scenes with Domino, he's very creepy and very believable. You can kind of believe him as one of those menacing, abusive lovers. But in terms of Bond villains, which, now there is sort of a category unto itself that has been copied a million times, I don't think he stands up nearly as much as I could name 10 others, and I think I just did.
Matt, any final thoughts to that before we move on?
Well, I do want to briefly talk about henchmen for a second because I think Barbara Carrera does a great female hench person in this movie. I think she's believable and funny and hot. She kind of nails everything. So I think there's 3 bad people in this movie, to be honest. And I think they
no
all
pun intended.
And don't forget the guy. Don't forget Rippy. Don't forget Rippy, the guy that beats the crap out of Connery in the Shrublands gym, played by what's his name? Something Roach. He played the boxer in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he was also the big thug in Temple of Doom.
Yes.
Like, that guy's.
He was quite good.
I was going to say comedy director Jay Roach.
Yeah.
A different guy.
We're just going to move on from villains. We'll jump over to Dave real quick, though. I'd like to get some thoughts. How do you think the debate's going so far? Where are you landing?
I am very surprised so far. Impressed, surprised. Not. I knew John was going to be able to bring it because he is a walking encyclopedia of James Bond knowledge. I felt bad for Godecker having to take up this challenge.
Yeah.
But I think Godecker is making some really great and interesting points that may sway me. And John, again, is making some counter punches that I think could sway me as well. So it's still up in the air.
Very good. With that, then we're going to move on to question number 3. Let's see if you guys can sway Dave here or the other debater. Question 3 will start with Matt. Although every Bond film has high-stakes missions and death-defying action, the plot for each of the films can vary greatly. Talk about the overall story, mission, and action sequences to support your case for or against Never Say Never Again.
Okay, well, the main theme of the movie, outside of the stolen nuclear weapons, because that's the plot of the movie. The whole plot of the movie is this is James Bond's last deal. He's too old to do this anymore. He's too old for this shit. And this is it. This is his last mission. So the fact that everything revolves around that idea, every fight scene, every love scene, even the whole fact that he's in a rehab facility because he's old and they're trying to work him up a bit, leads me to think, wow, they're really putting together a story outside of just the story about the nuclear weapons. Because in the end, somebody stole a weapon, somebody's got a laser, the bad guy always has the thing. So that's sort of irrelevant in any Bond movie. But I think what makes this a great movie is you get to know a different kind of Bond. This is a little more truer sense of who this guy is. And I don't particularly like the way they got personal with Daniel Craig. I think it's a little sappy. They did get into who he is, but I just feel like it's a little but this is still keeping James Bond with what I said earlier about a wink and a nod, that we're having fun in this movie, and he's having fun with the character more than I think any other Bond has done. And he's really having a good time. And even the fight scene with the boxer guy at the rehab place, that's actually one of my favorite fight scenes in the whole thing. He takes a barbell and he throws it at the guy's chest and he doesn't even move. It's like silly things like that. I love that whole fight scene. And then the fact that there's nuclear weapons, yeah, there's always love. So that's not as important as the main theme, which is we're going to get to know a different kind of Bond, old man Bond.
And with that, we'll turn it over to John.
I guess the only thing I can really think of doing in terms of talking about story is I can pull out the ones that I like personally because, and we could all make the argument that they're kind of the same movie recycled. I think the biggest flaw in this film, though, is it literally is a remake. So you're literally watching a remake of Thunderball, which I think, is one of Connery's strongest and is coolest and, is just stylish. And I think, so while I agree that there is at least more thematic stuff going on, am I too old for this? There's a fighting ageism. I think if we're talking about story, it literally has been there, done that, because it was redone 12 years earlier or, 14 years earlier. But just pulling out themes, I think that, we were right. We didn't really get into Bond having a theme. I think this actually might have been one of the first, on Her Majesty's Secret Service, because it was dealing with falling in love and loss. Brosnan had it with GoldenEye, with, dealing with a friend who betrayed him and reconciling that. But I will pull out one of my favorites, Skyfall, and I think that film actually deals with many themes at once. It deals with being orphaned and bad parenting, letting go of our parents, and how do we move forward or stay in one place in the face of loss or in the face of irrelevance. I think the whole MI6 and 007 enterprise is under assault by the modern era. Is it necessary? And so we come out through that with the fully formed Bond, having gone through loss and now embracing a new M who's going to take him into a new territory. So I think it's hard to compare the modern era because they're just going to do that with films. If we go back to that era, I think the film Never Say Never Again acquits itself well with the mechanics of the story. I think the ending with the missiles just is a little flat, but I think a lot of these Bond films with their shootouts suffer from that. But I think its biggest fatal flaw, and it's not really its fault, is just that it is a remake of another story we've already seen.
Well, with that, let's jump into the open debate portions, Matt. So, yeah, jump on in. Let's address the Skyfall.
The first thing I do want to say, yes, it is a remake, but I think one thing that does set it apart is Kim Basinger gets to kill the bad guy at the end. She comes in and actually shoots the bad guy dead.
Well, in Thunderball, Domino does that too. She puts a harpoon in him.
Is it the same thing? Yeah, but this is Kim Basinger and she's hot. But anyway, the other thing I did want to say
point
to that
counterpoint.
I think we just won right there.
Kim Basinger underwater,
and he threw in Barbara Carrera.
Or Honey Rider. I mean, she might have been the hottest in the bikini. But anyway, I did want to say something about Skyfall too. Like, yeah, you get into his childhood a little bit, but it's boring. The whole Skyfall thing just makes me want to go to it. Like, if he stares at an empty castle for any more minutes in that movie, I'm going to go take.
All right, then I'll swap it out with GoldenEye and stand by my point.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean,
wow.
I've got 25 films.
I love it.
You've got one.
Yeah. And if you want to get into it, then also Timothy Dalton does a good job with when he gets kicked out of the.
That's a very good point.
He leaves. We do get some personal stuff, but I think what makes this particular personal stuff more fun is that it's fun. There's no sadness in it, really. There's no, over-emotional, melodramatic garbage you got to wade through. This is just, he's getting old, and it's fun. It's a lot lighter.
Fantastic. And that will conclude the three questions. We will have closing remarks from each of you. I just got to chime in quickly. I'm really impressed with the way you both have articulated your points. I sort of opened the floor with that question thinking, you may dive into the action stuff and talk about how the stunts were spectacular this way or that way. But the way you both started articulating character and character development and the history of all that throughout the films was really interesting to listen to. Dave, any thoughts on this right now before we get our closing statements and before you make your decision?
Just a couple of things. I think, Matt, very impressive bringing up Timothy Dalton. Just like having the guts to be like, I'm going to mention the worst Bond.
Come on.
Dave does have an opinion here.
That's the second
next
debate. We're going to do
debate.
the next one. Matt and I are going to team up against Dave.
Yeah, because he's good. He got 2 movies, man. He's good.
Well, let's jump into our closing statements. John, I'm going to let you go first. You'll have 1 minute to give us any thoughts that may or may not have come up during the discussion, or if there's just anything else you want to reiterate.
I think
You've got 1 minute.
Never Say Never Again was the product of Kevin McClory, who worked with Ian Fleming supposedly over some drinks, and they came up with this idea for a James Bond film, screenplay, and it ran afoul with the rights that Fleming suddenly sobered up and realized that he had sold to Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman. And Kevin McClory was able to legally wrangle the rights to do that movie, and they gave him a bone and made him a part of Thunderball. But he hung on to it, and and it was actually, going to be remade several times. It was remade as Never Say Never Again. They were going to remake it again in 2000 with Timothy Dalton called Warhead A.D., and then eventually the rights reverted. And I bring all of that up only because this film should have been something else. I think if Connery was going to come back and do a competing film, I personally wish it was just not a remake. I remember as a kid, and I prefer Octopussy at the time, but I went and saw it. I mean, gosh, it's a kid in a candy store to get 2 Bond films in 1 year. But I remember feeling a little let down even then, because it's like, it's a remake. And I was old enough to know what a remake was. And in subsequent viewing, I get disappointed because I feel like, man, if it wasn't a remake, but unfortunately, that's the only way it could have been made. So I think also the hard thing is that you're asking me to debate this film against all of the others, and that's a hard thing to do because in my mind there's just no context. So you kind of have to pick a film at a time, and I think Matt brought up some interesting arguments about it just being fun while also exploring a theme, and I think that's important. But I'm very disappointed with the score. It feels dated at the time, but you're comparing it to Barry, which is hard, and because that's just what's there. I think some of the stunts were fun, but I think that it's competing with other films of that era. And if I'm going to put it head to head with Octopussy of the same year, I think Octopussy just was more ornate, had more crazy stunts. I did like the casting of this film, and I think Matt brings up some good points about some characters being realistic. I like Bernie Casey. He was the first black Felix Leiter, and he's a good actor in his own right in the role. But I think there is a little bit of Connery's doing this because it's a paycheck. He doesn't have anything to gain by it, so he is having fun in the role, but he hated that role. So for him to come back, there is a little part when you watch it now, like, he's probably doing this for the check. As was Roger Moore, to be fair. I think both those guys, and they were friends, and they went head to head. And I think this film is enjoyable. I like Irvin Kershner as a director.
Got to wrap it up.
But I think if I had to compare it to any number of Bond films, I just don't think it holds up. I don't think the villain holds up as a Bond villain. I think that the romantic angle is just as weird as it is with Roger Moore, him being old.
Okay, yeah, we gotta have times up here. Thank
Obviously,
you.
I could go on.
Matt, I will give you some equal time on there. I wanted to let that go. He was articulating some fine points,
sure.
and I did want to hear that out. But I would like to hear Matt's thought, not just against anything John's saying, but anything else that you want to bring up for your closing remarks. You'll have equal time.
First of all, I think John's knowledge of Bond is just impressive. So my tip of the hat. First of all, number one, any movie directed by Irvin Kershner cannot be bad. The guy who directed Empire and RoboCop 2, that guy makes a good movie. Okay, enough said. Bernie Casey, good. I'm glad you brought him up. He's really good, and he's just a good actor. He's just awesome. And the first black guy to do it, awesome. Rowan Atkinson, we haven't even mentioned him, and he is maybe the best comic relief in any of the Bond movies, and he's not in it enough. But Mr. Bean is in it, for God's sakes. That's fucking awesome. First of all, this movie was the first Zoom meeting. They had a Zoom meeting, the bad guy, in the beginning of the movie. Spectre has a Zoom meeting. Okay, I just think that's awesome. Best underwater toupee. I mean, honestly, that toupee looked good underwater. With this movie, you get a James Bond dance number. What? James Bond doesn't dance. He tangos, man. He tangos. Okay? Last thing I want to say is it's about the middle of the movie, there's a video game fight. And the video game fight is awesome. And it's called Domination. The eternal battle for the domination of the world continues. And they value countries at different, like the U.S. is somehow worth $42,000 for some reason. Not sure why. But the fact that the game electrocutes you a little bit, that's fantastic. I don't know why there is a real video game domination, but it's something else. It's a role playing game, I think. We should.
Yeah, it's usually for people in a relationship.
Yeah, exactly. Domination. So video game. Let's see what else.
Okay, wrap it up.
Have to say. I think this movie, Kim coming back, and regardless of what you think of the script or whatever, this movie proves that Connery is the best Bond, because not only does he look good, he is a zaddy, right? He looks good. He's got his shirt off and a bunch of stuff. He looks good. Roger Moore didn't take his shirt off after Octopussy, I don't think. Anyway.
And that is our closing statements. Gentlemen, well done, both of you. Very, very well done. This has been a fantastic, I don't even want to call it a debate, just a fantastic discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For me, what this is coming down to is sort of the excitement and the spirit of joy of Never Say Never Again coming from Matt versus this encyclopedia of knowledge, Mr. IMDb of James Bond. It's sort of like, God, which way are you going to go? And it's sort of like heart versus mind here a little bit with the history that John brought in, defending all of the other movies and the fun and love and joy that Matt has for his first James Bond film. So, Dave, you're in a tough spot, I think. Maybe you have some other thoughts, but we're going to dive into Dave's thoughts and final vote.
Really great debate. Jonathan's absolutely right. I was thinking the same thing, that Matt's joy of this movie was coming through in the closing debates. And of course, I've known John a long time. We've talked James Bond a lot. And I know he loves the character, loves the films, and all his points were very salient.
Yeah.
Round one, I think John had a really great point with the music as something that is inherently Bond, that ding, 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 it's just... it is missing from Never Say Never Again. Even as a kid seeing it for the first time, I felt that way. That makes no sense, but there it is. I do think Matt had a lot of great points. How the opening of this James Bond was different from all the others, but then John came right back and said, "Look, they did it from Russia with Love," which I believe is the first was before Never Say Never Again, chronologically. So it was a very good counter argument. Excuse me. The other thing I thought also, just in general, John really stayed within the era of the 80s, 70s, and 60s. He kept it contemporary to other Never Say Never Again movies, which I thought was generous and thorough, because I don't know how any of these movies can stand up to the Daniel Craig era, because it's a very different era. We're in a very different filmmaking space. So in the idea of a universe as opposed to one-offs.
Yeah.
So I thought it was great that John stuck to that era.
Yeah, I appreciated that. I like the way he brought up, he did bring up some Daniel Craig points with Skyfall and everything. And again, I expected him to kind of lean into, well, look at the way they can do action and stunts. But it wasn't. He tried to counterpoint with the character, and then very quickly shifted gears and said, okay, well, I'll go back to GoldenEye, to your point, Dave. Like he stayed back into that area. So.
And then, on question 2 about the villains, I think Matt had a lot of great points about how this was a more threatening villain, a villain who, to me, sounded more grounded. And this is someone who hasn't seen this film in a long, long time. So I'm just going off of what he said. And also, Max van Sydow is like, how do you pass that up? And one of my favorite Mac comments is, "You got to give him a break." That was the end of his argument. And anytime you end an argument with, "You got to give someone a break,"
give him a break, dude.
It's pretty good. It's got to be a pretty good argument. But also then John countered with a lot of great points about what makes a Bond villain a Bond villain. And he listed off like 5 or 6 villains that all sounded awesome to me. And then finally, on the last question, talking about, it was about action, but you talked about character, which I just I forgot all about the question and got like wrapped up in your discussion about character and how thematic it can be, which is something I always overlook in a James Bond film. I don't look for thematics, and that may be why it doesn't.
It's rarely
with me,
there.
It was. It's there you go.
Well, yeah. Watch Diamonds Are Forever again, and you'll be like, oh. Oh.
Yeah. No, I have. During the pandemic, there was a bout where I was just going through like James Bond, like Roger Moore's James Bond films. And I also liked Matt's point that he didn't like Daniel Craig. How did he put it? Meh.
I mean, to be fair, I think Daniel Craig does a good job. I don't think the Casino Royale is a good film. I don't particularly think the other three films are that good. I just don't think they're that good. He's fine. I don't have a problem with him.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the thing. I think Matt has a lot of great points, but he's Sisyphus pushing a boulder up a mountain. I'm going to give it to John.
Whoa, there it is, ladies and gentlemen.
I just don't think Never Say Never Again can be called the best James Bond film.
Well,
now I want to go watch it.
You know what, John earned that. For sure.
I just want to say, though, that I think that this was a complex debate, and I've listened to some of the others, and you can tell that it's the people are sometimes working because they may actually like the film that they're supposed to be deriding, or they have to deride a film that they actually secretly like. And I think in this case, it's probably one of the more problematic ones, because Matt is coming at it as a fan and a supporter of one movie, and I'm throwing, again, we joked about it, 25 other films, but 25 other films that you can carve out in their own little niches, like Daniel Craig will go on the bookshelf, I think, or in the dumpster at Matt's house. And Timothy Dalton's little film. I mean, and honestly, I would love to do a show defending Timothy Dalton because he does get a lot of derision. But what happens is the time goes by, the guy who just did it ends up getting shit on. So what happens is that at the time that Craig was cast, Brosnan was getting dumped on, and then Dalton was starting to get some praise. Like, oh, well, he set the groundwork that Craig got. So I think when the next guy comes, they're going to start criticizing Craig. Oh, yeah, now finally we have someone who's lightening up. And Brosnan is going to assume sort of the mantle, if he's not already, of people. Because, enough time goes by, people want to pick their retro Bond. And we got to remember, 60 years, that's several generations. So I think the guys that end up suffering the most are the people from the 80s and the 70s and the 60s, because so much time goes by. And I love that Matt is not only just praising the movie, but he's really bringing up the point, and I thought it was a strong one that I'm surprised Dave didn't bring up, of just it's Sean Connery. That Sean Connery's back. And it doesn't matter if Roger Moore's making a movie. It doesn't matter if Roger Moore's film made more of that money. It was Sean Connery as James Bond. And that was kind of the bullet point for all the reviews, is like, I don't care if you don't like the movie. It's Sean Connery as Bond. We should be, after 12 years, he's back. So I think that I will tip my hat to the film for that we got another Bond with Connery, and he and Moore were friends, joked about the rivalry, and we were just lucky that summer, I think, as Bond fans.
Excellent. Well, that's a great way to sum all this up. Thank you both for coming in and having this debate. Thank you, Dave, for being such an incredible judge. John and Matt, this was awesome. This has been one of my favorite debates so far. So thank everybody for listening. Remember, the debate doesn't end here. Let us know who you thought won, or give us a movie or topic to debate on Twitter at Cinema Craptaculus, or on Instagram at Cinema Craptaculus. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and rate us wherever you listen. Good night and good debate.
Thanks again for joining us on our Cinema Craptaculus journey. Subscribe to Cinema Craptaculus on iTunes or Spotify. And if you weren't totally offended, or even if you were, please rate us on iTunes. It helps us get the Craptaculus word out there. And remember to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Craptaculus.